So good morning, good evening, wherever you are. This is Guy Christian with Goal 16 podcast. Today, this episode is going to have a focus on anti-corruption. We have a guest. Our guest today is a very renowned writer specialist, Mr. Richard Messick. Richard is does consult for international organizations, development agencies, and non-governmental organizations on legal development and anti-corruption issues. As an attorney in the United States, he advised political parties, office holders, corporations, and political committees on campaign finance and ethics issues, and has represented individuals and corporations in state and federal matters involving fraud and corruption. So after serving as a Chief Counsel of the State Committee of Foreign Relations, he joined the World Bank, where he worked until his retirement on legal and judicial reform and anti-corruption project. His writings have appeared in scholarly and popular publications, including the American Political Science Review, the World Bank Research Observer, the Wall Street Journal, and the Washington Post. And he is one of the contributors. He participates a lot at writing blogs on the Global Anti-Corruption blog. So you have a link at the end of this this podcast for those who are viewing that on YouTube. You have a link to follow all the articles that Richard had written so far. So Richard, welcome, and thank you for accepting to have a conversation with me on Goal 16.
Well, it's nice to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Great. So let's dive into our subject. I know you've written extensively on issues of corruption, and since Goal 16, discusses about corruption and illicit financial flows, today we are going to focus, as I stated earlier, on the issues of anti-corruption. So, in your opinion, has the fight against corruption in all forms of corruption actually, has this fight slowed down since the United States current president, Donald Trump, came to power?
Oh, no. That's the short answer. Yes, there have been some sparks that Mr. Trump has given off, most recently on Friday night when he commuted the sentence of one of his cronies, allegedly because the crony refused to give evidence that would have helped impeach him. That itself is a corrupt matter. But despite the wrongdoing of the Trump and his cronies, the sort of corruption, the fact of the matter is, once you get a big machine rolling down a hill, which the anti-corruption machine has been rolling down a hill for several years, it gets a lot of momentum. Right. And one person may try to slow it down for a bit. But look, not a week after Trump took office, the person in charge of the prosecuting American companies for paying bribes overseas gave a talk to a group of lawyers and said, I'm not backing off at all. We're going forward on this prosecuting these companies that pay bribes. Now, this fellow gave the talk. He used to be one of the lawyers that represented companies that were either accused of paying bribes or retained people like him to help them comply with the anti-bribery laws. There's now a huge number of lawyers and consultants, accountants, not only in America, but in the United Kingdom, in Germany, in Mexico, wherever, that are making their living helping companies avoid getting charged with bribery or defending them if they're accused of bribery. And that's really this big machine of enforcement. I mean, they make good money at it. it's a good living. None of them want to stop it.
Mm-hmm.
And it couldn't have been better when, as I say, one of the person Trump appoints to take care of this law is part of the machine that makes good money from seeing it enforced. So I was in the room when he reassured his former colleagues that he would continue to enforce the law vigorously. And I was with somebody like me that works in civil society, doesn't make very much money at this. And we looked around the room and laughed and said, oh, these high-priced lawyers and consultants can breathe easy. They can afford that second home they've got or that fancy sports car or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
That's part of the machine. That keeps this thing going. And now you've just got this huge worldwide effort moving towards less and less corruption. And it may slow down at some points. It may hit a bump in the road, but it's moving. It's got momentum. And you're always going to see setbacks, but by and large, you're seeing progress on many fronts.
Right. Yeah, I wanted to have your own perspective on another article that you've written concerning barring corrupt officials from entering the U.S. We know, for example, that the Magnitsky Act is one of the instruments that can be used to that effect. But there were some recent development in Canada and in the UK. So, I mean, what do you think is, in other words, let me rephrase. For instance, in the US, what is the process to obtain to obtain to get a foreign official not to enter the United States?
Well, the US, like I believe most countries,
right,
it's purely up to the executive branch of government as to whether they will grant a non-US citizen a visa to come in as a tourist, to come in as a short-term do work. There are a variety of different kinds of visas that you need as a non-US citizen to enter the United States. Now, the process by which the US government determines if you're either violated human rights or you're corrupt is they gather information from, say, citizens in the country, the US embassy in the particular country, from their sources of information there, from civil society, from just the newspaper, and then they make a determination. And if they decide that you are corrupt, they won't give you a visa.
Right.
And that, now, while that's a good thing, I do have my concerns because there's no one that checks to make sure they got it right.
That was going to be my next question to you. I mean, the process, is there any oversight, or because there's no criteria? No, there's no criteria. Okay, what is this 1 point, this 2 point, this is 3 points that you have, you have violated, or we think once those 3 or 4 points are met, automatically, if someone files a complaint or an officer notice that there's something like that happened, then automatically the process is
you have no right to question it. And I'll tell you a disturbing story from when I was at the World Bank.
Right.
A fellow from Colombia who lived in the United States for 10, 12 years, had been an academic at an American university, come to work at the World Bank.
Right.
He goes to Argentina for a World Bank mission. He comes back to enter you fly into Miami. They don't let him in. He says, "What's the matter? You're on a list."
Wow.
It took him a year to get back in. He had a family in Washington, D.C. area. As far as I know, he was never told why he was denied entry, and then why all of a sudden they changed their mind. Now, he had a lawyer over that year who kept saying, "Look, here's his background, here's who he is." There were rumors, he had a name that was very similar to a really big, well-known drug lord in Colombia. Maybe they made a mistake.
Yeah.
But no one ever found out. Here he is, he's got a family, children, a wife, and a house in Washington, D.C. He's living in a hotel. I mean, he was lucky. He was a World Bank staff member, so they took care of him. He lived in a hotel in Buenos Aires, Argentina for a year. Until suddenly, okay, you can come in.
You can come in.
Yeah.
This is very strange. Because
and it's, as I said, it's a good thing to keep people who are corrupt out of these countries, because then this is one less reason for them to steal money if they can't have a fancy house in New York or London or wherever. But unless you think the government bureaucracy is perfect and will never make a mistake, you'd like to have some way that somebody could say, "Oh, wait a minute, you've confused that guy. There are two people with that name," or, "No, he's not the person you think." And in the US, the traditional way that you do that is through a court proceeding in which you challenge the government's decision. And the government has to come and show that it was a rational decision, that, they got it right, that you are who you are. But there's no legal right in the United States to enter the country if you're not a US citizen. So there's I thought maybe we should have some sort of confidential arbitration panel, or just some way that someone somewhere could take a second look and say, "Oh, you made a mistake here."
Right.
I still don't know the details of how this World Bank fellow, his lawyer just kept coming every week and saying, "Here's more information, here's who he is, here's his, here's where he went to grade school, here's where he, but here's all these people."
It's the same thing in Canada and in the UK with the new law that just came out, where the UK government decided that they can seize people's properties if they have committed some, human rights violations.
Oh, you mean the seizure of their property?
Right.
Okay, you're talking about the unexplained wealth order.
That is correct.
Which one of the law enforcement authorities can go to you and say, "Wait a minute, you don't have a job, you don't have a big savings account. How do you live in a 10 million pound house?
That's right.
Please show us how you live there." The courts oversee that law.
Okay.
And in fact, the courts just awarded to residents of London who are Azerbaijani nationals their legal fees for resisting. They said, "No, wait a minute, we got this money legitimately." And the court was convinced that at least the government hadn't convincingly shown it was illegal. And that was the government's burden, is to show by a preponderance of the evidence it's likely this money was corrupt money. Right. The government failed to meet that test, and these two Azeri residents of London are going to be awarded £1.5 million for their legal fees in fighting the order.
But I thought Canada had a similar Magnitsky Act like us here.
does, and I'm not sure if that's work. I'm not sure if they've come to any proceeding yet where there's been a mistake.
Right.
The UK one is the one that's the most advanced because they've already tested the law against their human rights and found, yes, if they have the facts, if they can show, then there's nothing wrong with seizing the property. In the case I'm talking about, the court just didn't think they had enough. They hadn't done a good enough investigation to show it was likely the money came from corrupt sources.
Right. Now, let me ask you this. Do you think private prosecution should be enacted? You know, I mean, let me rephrase. Do you think private prosecution should be used by countries to help fight corruption?
Well, now, private prosecution can mean two different things. One, it can mean, as it does in some states in the United States and in the UK, that I'm a victim of a crime. I go to the prosecutor says, I haven't got time to prosecute that case. We're too busy, or I don't think there's enough evidence. Don't bother me. Then you can go and file your own criminal case. And if you can show to the court that you've got the evidence that you really were the victim of a crime, and this is the person that you've named as the defendant is really the perpetrator, you can get them convicted. That it hasn't been used very often. In the UK, it's in theory possible, but rarely invoked, although people have discussed it, particularly with corruption, that maybe we should try it again. I think the more promising private prosecution is the people who have been injured by the corruption ask a court to award them damages. If I hit you, if I'm driving along the street and you cross in front of me and I hit you, and you were in the right and I'm in the wrong, I ran the red light, you can sue me and you can get money for your medical expenses and lost wages. I injured you. Well, if I'm a public official and I steal government money, and as a result, you can't get the health care you need because the government doesn't have the money, or your children can't get educated because the government can't afford to run the school,
right,
or your neighborhood doesn't get clean water delivered to the houses because the sanitation equipment isn't maintained, and you get sick. In all those cases, you've suffered damages, and the person who, or persons involved in the corruption, should pay to compensate you, to compensate you for the damage you've suffered. And that's where I think there's a real possibility of these private actions. And unfortunately, they're rarely, if ever, invoked. And I'm actually working with a group of people in various countries to see if there aren't ways we can't find to spur those who have been harmed by corruption to bring private actions for damages.
Okay. Now, if you don't mind, I'm not going to push back on that, but you know that some of the people who are against, that concept of private prosecution have always claimed that corruption is a victimless crime. What do you say to them?
Oh, they're so wrong.
Right.
But look, I can give you some real world examples.
Yeah.
Okay. There are two banks, Credit Suisse and VTB, a Russian bank, and a Middle East shipbuilding company called Criminvest. Now, the public record shows, and there was testimony at a US trial, that Credit Suisse and Privinvest paid bribes to the government officials, for these government officials to take out loans with Credit Suisse and with the Russian bank in order to buy equipment from the Middle East shipbuilding company, Privinvest. According to some of the papers, $200 million in bribes. Okay. None of this equipment that the government was supposed to get with these loans ever showed up. So the government's out all this money. In addition, when the corruption was uncovered, the donors, Mozambique is a very poor country and dependent on foreign assistance to meet its education and health needs. And the donor agencies suspended their money. So all sorts of people, the economy suffered. It didn't grow as fast. People didn't get health care. They didn't get education. Those people are all victims. That wasn't a victimless crime. Every citizen of Mozambique is a victim to some degree, except the few who were taking the money. You know, the $15 million bribe, the then Minister of Finance allegedly got in order to guarantee the loans. The $50 million bribe, the son of the then president of the country allegedly got to make sure his father approved all these things. You know, they weren't harmed, but everybody else who, you know, when the economy started to contract and when the donors pulled money, these people were all injured. They were injured severely. No, this is not a victimless crime by any. Now, sometimes lots of people just suffer a little, you know, but sometimes the suffering is really significant on a few people. And either way,
collectively, it's not a victimless crime.
Not at all. Not at all.
Okay. Now, let's talk about the role of enablers enablers of kleptocrats. Those enablers are generally located within the OECD countries. You know, what do you recommend, you know, for them, considering that, you know, we all agree, you know, that I will assume that you are in the agreement with people like me and others, that the enablers play a big part in the manifestation of illicit financial flows around the world. So what would you recommend that a country does to tackle the issues of enablers?
So, just in case some of your audience hasn't heard that term,
right?
By enablers, what we're talking about is, I'm a corrupt politician. I've got $10 million. Somebody just paid me in a bribe.
Mm-hmm.
I got to hide it.
Right.
And I want to hide it probably outside my country.
Mm-hmm.
So if something happens, I can leave quickly.
Mm-hmm.
So I contact a lawyer, an accountant, a consultant, or even a firm
mm-hmm.
in another country and say, gee, I have this $10 million. Will you help me invest it in your country or invest it in a third country? And invest it in a way that my name is not attached to it.
Right.
That my ownership is concealed.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. Well, these, and the most famous one of recent was the Panamanian law firm Mossack Fonseca.
Mm-hmm.
When someone leaked their internal documents,
mm-hmm.
it was revealed that they had created 180,000 corporations
mm-hmm.
for not only corrupt politicians, but for tax dodgers.
Mm-hmm.
A few people we think it was a legitimate thing. There's some movie star who didn't want her fans to know where her house was, and so they wouldn't come around and bother her. So she wanted the house in a nice resort area in another name. Okay, But most of these people, as far as we can tell, just for dishonest, illegal means. And Mossack Fonseca said, sure. Now, Mossack Fonseca is in Panama, but they worked with a network of people around the world who, like them, either knew this money was illegal, that was stolen money, or else made it their business not to ask any questions. Because setting up corporations in, say, the British Virgin Islands or Gibraltar or Singapore or the state of Nevada in the United States is a simple piece of work. Doesn't take very long, it's not very hard. But if you're a corrupt official and I'm doing it for you, I'm going to charge you a lot of money.
Of course, yeah.
And you're not going to go around and ask a bunch of people for a lower price. You're scared that you'll be caught. So the enablers are making lots of money for little work. What do? Well, the best thing we can do, when an enabler gets caught, as they occasionally do because the corrupt official gets caught, and they go, gee, how was the money hidden? Oh, well, this lawyer in New York, or this trust and company service provider in the British Virgin Islands, or that Panamanian law firm. The enabler says, well, I didn't know it was corrupt. I didn't know where the money came from. The fellow said, or the minister said, it was his family's money, or he won in it gambling in Macau. Can't do anything to me. I'm innocent. So what the Financial Action Task Force, an international group that sets standards for money laundering, has been saying for years is make the enablers conduct their own investigation of where the money comes from. So they can't claim if they get caught that they had no knowledge. The crime that they commit is not obtaining the knowledge. Make the obligation on everyone that might handle money from a current or former public official or a family member or a close associate to make an independent determination of where that money comes from. Okay, you said you won it in Macau. At what casino?
Yeah.
And then you call the casino. You said you inherited it from your aunt.
Right.
Let's go to the record and see if there's a will in your aunt's name given you.
That's right.
Now, the international community, or those who've been fighting corruption, have for almost 2 decades been urging countries of the world to make their lawyers, their accountants, subject to that law. And some countries are complying and many aren't. Our Australia, Canada, the United States, and China have zero compliance with that law.
With that law, yeah.
Another some 50 odd have just vague compliance.
Right.
And those include Norway, Singapore, Denmark. Some of the refusal to comply is, I think they have an argument, and I understand the argument. I don't think it's as compelling as if you don't comply, these people get away with this enabling. Some lawyers say, and I'll tell you the argument the American lawyers make is, well, they won't come to us. Everybody has a right to a lawyer. And when we're defending them in a case or giving them advice, they have to be completely honest with us and forthcoming so we can give them the best advice. And if you say, well, I have to disclose what they tell me as part of these rules to crack down on enablers, they won't tell me and they won't get as good an advice. Well, the answer back is, if it's about a criminal matter, it's about something in court, that's what we're not talking about. But when they come to you and say, help me buy a house, or help me put this money into a corporation in Panama, That has nothing to do with being a lawyer and giving legal advice.
Right.
And I think it's in part, it's a very lucrative profession and they just don't want to give it up. So we just have to keep pressuring legislators in these countries to look, this is the story. And there'll be some, and I think the more we make a good case to the better lawyers of, look, you're not a real estate agent, you're not an investment counselor, you're a lawyer. Yeah. All we're saying is if you act as a real estate agent, you act as a investment counselor, which is something unrelated to legal obligations, then you have to do these kinds of things that in order to catch these people. Right. And if we can find enough of the better lawyers in these countries who don't make money these sort of underhanded and shady ways, I think ultimately we'll be able to turn that tide. But it's a fight.
Okay.
It's a fight.
All right. Good. Now let's talk about another interesting subject. You and I had a chance to chat a little bit about it. The so-called International Anti-Corruption Court, which is a fantasy, or some think it's a fantasy. I don't know if you are among them, but some people think it's just utopic, and some people think it's something that may help. In reality, I don't know, but I want to share your own view with the audience. What do you think about the International Anti-Corruption Court?
There are just two preconditions to getting the a world anti-corruption court, a court that would hear the cases of corruption involving senior government officials, but wouldn't be a court from that country, so they could be independent of any powerful government official.
Right.
That is, getting the governments that employ these officials to join this court, and then being sure that the judges we appoint to the court are as close to angels as we can get. If we can meet those two conditions, it's a great idea. How many countries where there really are a lot of corrupt officials are going to say, oh, sure, we'll join a court when the first thing's going to happen is they're going to come after me?
Yeah.
I'll sign my country up for that. That just doesn't seem very great. In fact, there was a discussion about the possibility of an international court when the United Nations Convention Against Corruption was negotiated in the late 1990s, and it just didn't. There was no interest whatsoever. And I just don't see any. That hasn't changed, even though a few people who weren't involved in the 1999 negotiations have suddenly discovered this and think it's a great idea. And I also think we would have to have judges of an extraordinary capability to avoid, as the International Criminal Court and the prosecutors there have made some mistakes. We have an International Criminal Court on just the most horrendous crimes, war crimes and so forth, and they're not gaining support, it's losing support. So my view is it's just too fantastic, too impossible something to achieve. So let's go after things that are realistic, ambitious, but realistic. Let's improve the systems we have, like crack down on the enablers.
Right.
That's tough enough. That's tough enough.
So, Rick, what do you think about the last decision of Canada with respect to stolen asset recovery, to be able to use those proceeds to finance, COVID, I believe it was COVID-19.
Well, it's not quite, that's a proposal. It's not quite a decision yet.
Okay.
The problem that the world communities had is there are times when assets are stolen, they're deposited in a bank in Canada, and then the government the people who stole the assets are thrown out of power, and the new government comes in and isn't capable of going through the process of getting the assets back, or it's not really a new government, it's just different people that are tied to the same old crooks. Mm-hmm. And so they don't go to Canada and say, give the assets back to the people of our country. Mm-hmm. And the Canadian Senate has realized that this is a problem, and it's playing out, for example, in Venezuela. We know the current leaders of Venezuela have stolen a lot of money from the people of Venezuela. They've got it overseas. And there are a lot of Venezuelan citizens who are, hurting. They're refugees in Colombia and Peru and Brazil. They're on the border in flimsy housing. And these are countries that are refugees and don't have the money. Mm-hmm. They're not wealthy countries to take care of them. So the Canadian senator behind this has said, look, why don't we take this money that we know is stolen from Canada, stolen from the Venezuelan citizens by their leaders that they've hidden here in Canada, and use it to help refugees. Refugees from Venezuela that, it's really their money. They're the citizens of Venezuela. It's stolen from them. And now they're suffering. Let's put this money to use to help them. Mm-hmm. And I believe the Canadians are going to consider, as I say, it's a proposal right now, and I think it's going to get some serious consideration going forward. But, we have all these people that are suffering and and a few people who have stolen millions, if not billions, and can't we use their money to help those who are suffering?
Right. Now, before I let you go, because we're almost at the end, what do you think? Do you think the profession of lobby, being a lobbyist, do you think that profession should exist? Because this is just a fabrication of our Western world. We don't have lobbyists in the developing countries. Okay, that's one of the huge difference. And sometimes I have the displeasure of being pointed out that, you guys, you like to point out that Africa is this, Africa is that. But you guys have lobbyists there that are making money. Isn't that corruption? I'm like, well, when you think about it, that may be, but it's legitimate. It's under the law. It's a profession that, people who support that profession says it falls within the argument of the First Amendment of our Constitution. People are free to express themselves. So using means beyond advocating for an issue and getting money for it, it's a good thing. But the other side, the flip side of it is that other people think, no, it's not.
Well, I can tell you what life is like without lobbyists, because I worked in a country where there was somewhat like that, Peru.
In Peru, right.
And what happened? The Ministry of Transport one day put out a rule dealing with the import of used school buses from the United States. Mm-hmm. The United States, when the school bus gets older, they put it up for sale. And if you go all over Latin America, you'll see, and they're still in pretty good shape.
Right.
And these school buses are converted into city buses or buses between cities. And that's how people get around, because many people don't have cars, and this is the buses. Well, one day they popped out a rule of the Ministry of Transport that effectively would shut down the import of all used school buses, which would mean very soon many poor people in Peru would have no way to get from home to work or get to see their relatives. Mm-hmm. Why was this rule going to do that? Because the people that wrote the rule didn't know anything about how you imported used school buses. Mm-hmm. They might have been well-meaning, but they were ignorant. What could they have used? information from people who import used school buses for a living. Now, you could call that lobbying, and it is. They would have provided the information that would have said, don't write that rule like that, because we'll never be able to import another used school bus from America. So lobbying, it's like a lot of things. It can be, when it's done honestly, it provides information about how the world, how an industry works, how a particular proposed rule or law may or may not affect an industry. Now, if it's paying somebody behind the scenes, well, that's a different thing.
Right.
I can tell you, I once wrote a law to impose economic sanctions on South Africa, and because it was such a politically sensitive issue, none of the businesses affected by the law would come lobby me. So I wrote a law imposing economic sanctions with no input, no information, and I didn't know all these things. I'm just a lawyer that had to. So the day after it became law, President Reagan vetoed it, and then the Congress overrode the veto and it became law. Well, I had just assumed that when does the law become effective? Well, it becomes effective the moment it's enacted into law. Okay. Nobody said a word.
Right.
The next day, somebody calls me up and says, well, Mr. Messick, we have a shipment of specialty steel from South Africa 2 days out of New York City port. And what do you propose we do with it? And I said, well, just turn the ship around and go back to South Africa.
Yeah.
Well, he kind of laughed and he said, well, in the maritime industry, we don't carry enough fuel.
Yeah.
We have just enough fuel to get to New York City. Our only real option here is to abandon the ship, pull the seamen off, and let the ship float unmanned in the Atlantic Ocean.
Wow.
Do you have any other suggestions? Well, fortunately, and there were a number of things like that where I just didn't know, that you have to give people, things are in the middle of something.
Right.
Because no one lobbied me.
Yeah.
Now I heard that after the thing became law, everybody just tells me all these problems that I didn't know about when I wrote it. So we passed what they call a technical corrections law, that sort of made some, okay, if you're on the water in 2 days out from New York City, you can land, they're just, and there were other kinds of things. But if people had lobbied me, the bill would have not had all these unforeseen, like the used bus regulation in Peru.
Right.
When you don't have a knowledge, one element of lobbying is knowledge. Believe me, you don't want to write laws or regulations in the dark.
Good. Well, Rick, we are at the end of our conversation, given the time frame, but it was a wonderful conversation, very informative.
Well, thanks for having me.
Get your perspective on that, and thank you so much. And I hope our audience will enjoy it, as I did enjoy having this conversation with you. I know you and I will be meeting again during conferences on different panels, where we'll continue to discuss and exchange our ideas, how to make this world better.
Okay.
I thank you so much, and have a good and blessing afternoon in Washington, D.C.
Thank you so much. Good luck. All the best.
Thank you. Thank you, AD. Bye-bye.